Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the architecture of debt, psychology, structure, and the exhaust of the machine. We are going to look at the global economy purely as a mechanical engine. We're stepping completely away from the usual moral arguments here and taking a strictly logical, purely psychological standpoint. Our goal is to figure out why systemic debt is actually an engineered necessity for the institutions that run our world. Right off the bat, we've got to ask ourselves a pretty uncomfortable question. Is the cost of living crisis an accident, or is it an algorithm? When we really look at the data, we have to consider if the financial squeeze we're all feeling is just a mistake, like some bug in the system, or if it's simply the intentional exhaust of an optimization engine operating exactly the way it was designed to. To demystify all this, we're going to logically trace the system through 5 steps. First, the debt optimization engine. Second, the psychology of extraction. Third, manufacturing scarcity and urgency. Fourth, the political capture feedback. And finally, number 5, the cost of living exhaust. So part 1, the debt optimization engine, inverting the economic goal. To really understand this engine, we have to recognize a massive paradigm shift in the economy's core purpose. You see, an orthodox economy asks a very simple question: why does this exchange serve both parties? And that question has a natural satiation point, right? When both parties are served, the transaction is complete, everyone goes home happy. But a debt-optimizing economy asks a totally different question. It asks, how do we secure more debt? That is an unbounded question. It literally has no termination condition. For the institution, more debt is always, always better than less debt, meaning the accumulation is structurally infinite.
Mechanically, it plays out like this. Institutions issue a loan, but then they apply a recursive, compounding mathematical function to a fiat principle. This is the orthodox debt loop. It generates what the source material calls abstract catch-block money. It's essentially money claimed on a ledger without any corresponding time or physical value actually being provided by the lender.
And here is where we hit a massive thermodynamic violation. The exponential curve of compound interest demands continuous accelerating growth, but it demands it from a borrower, a human being whose capacity to generate caloric and economic output is strictly bounded by physical reality. This physical boundary is known as the reality tensor. I mean, think about it. You literally cannot work 30 hours in a 24-hour day. Which brings us to this incredibly stark reality. The system maximizes bank solvency, and as a necessary exhaust, it sacrifices human quality of life. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this isn't some grand smoky room conspiracy. It's simply the emergent property of an algorithm. New debt must be continuously created just to pay the interest on old debt. And because the money to pay that interest is never actually created when the loan originates, the economy has to grow exponentially forever, or the entire system just seizes up. Moving on to part 2, the psychology of extraction, the illusion of teeming mammon. So if the math literally guarantees extraction, how do the actual human beings running these banks and political systems sleep at night? How do these psychologically permit it? They aren't all malicious villains twirling their mustaches. To survive mentally, they rely on an archetypal defense mechanism defined as the Jezebel Standard. It's a system of absolute extraction, designed to consolidate power at the top, but it very specifically utilizes the mechanics of legalism to mask the theft of grassroots assets as necessary protection. The actors inside the system convince themselves that their hedge fund behavior is actually a moral good. To basically maintain their sanity, they build this moral shield. They'll point to ESG mechanisms, claiming they're forcing corporate accountability. They point to funding massive social infrastructure, hospitals, schools, things we all need. They point to securing dignified public retirements. By framing their massive wealth accumulation as stewardship, they completely mask their participation in a highly corrupt structure. They really truly believe they are taming mammon for the greater good. And honestly, this perceptual inversion is structurally required for them to just go to work every day. Which leads us to part 3, manufacturing scarcity and urgency, the mechanics of need. Once the operators are psychologically shielded, they have to mechanically feed their algorithm. They need to secure more debt. And this builds into the reality tensor debt matrix, which is a fascinating way to look at the true price of borrowing. The two operational levers at play here are scarcity and urgency. When there's abundant capital and low urgency, taking on debt is actually a net benefit. It's a great tool. But as a rational predator pushes those levers toward absolute deprivation and terminal need, normal credit warps. It turns into predatory, total extraction, and eventually reaches infinite cost. So here's the core logic problem for the bank. A population that has breathing room, high savings buffers, and abundant alternatives doesn't actually need debt. So predatory institutions literally cannot wait for need to materialize naturally. That would utterly collapse their business model. Instead, they have to use the predator's strategy, manufactured need. They must structurally engineer urgency and deliberately constrain your alternatives. So, what does their structural playbook actually look like to create that need? Well, first, they inflate the prices of inelastic necessities, things you absolutely cannot avoid buying, like housing, healthcare, and education. Then they normalize a high-consumption economy to completely wipe out your savings buffers, removing any thermodynamic breathing room you might have had. They even manufacture crises, their cycles of deregulation and crashes, that wipe out household wealth, while institutional capital just swoops in to buy it all up. By doing this, they push the population into highly distressed states as a baseline starting condition. It's purely logical. They are structurally incentivized to promote these problems because their entire extraction model depends on it.
That brings us to part 4, the political capture feedback, the thermodynamics of lobbying.
Because the rules for this entire extraction engine are set in the political arena, politicians inevitably inherit this exact same thermodynamic charge. They're operating in a field heavily saturated by a concentrated extraction system. And this system uses a very precise 3-step cycle to maintain those conditions of scarcity and urgency. Step 1, media acquisition. You control the narrative to normalize debt culture and suppress coverage of predatory lending. Step 2, political capture. You aggressively lobby against usury laws or antitrust regulations. And step 3, asset accumulation. They literally purchase the housing and healthcare infrastructure you rely on, raising the prices to increase your baseline urgency. The compound effect of this cycle on the public is something called negative posigravity. This is the systematic addition of mass to the field of possibility. Dominant institutions act like these massive stars, constantly broadcasting narratives of scarcity and risk. It makes alternative solutions feel like impossible mountains you have to climb, and makes debt feel like this inevitable gravity well. It puts a massive cognitive load on you, progressively narrowing your options until taking on debt feels mathematically and psychologically unavoidable.
And finally, part 5, the cost of living exhaust, hitting the biological hard floor.
So what actually happens when these abstract mathematical engines and psychological defense systems crash into human physical reality? As the source material powerfully points out, hunger, homelessness, and family dissolution are not preferences. They are physical states. When the escape velocity required to clear a debt trap exceeds a person's total caloric and economic output, they hit the biological hard floor. And at that exact coordinate, no ideological framing from the banks about personal responsibility or the free market can suppress the involuntary biological response to financial suffocation. This is exactly where the lender's psychological shield completely collapses against the borrower's lived physical reality.
So I want to leave you to consider this final, really provocative thought. What happens to the machine when the exponential demand for abstract, compounding interest finally, inevitably, collides with the finite biological hard floor of human survival? As the cost of living exhaust continues to choke our finite reality tensor, what is the ultimate breaking point of an economic engine that literally mandates infinite extraction on a very finite planet? It's a structural reality we are all going to have to face.